Okay, right. Uh, okay, I think it's recording. Yeah. So our learners today are joining us from resource-challenged districts across Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bodoland, and Maharashtra. These individuals are working within public administration where they're driving meaningful change on a wide range of issues such as livelihood, climate, public health, education, and gender. Now, before I invite Swapan to deliver today's seminar, I'd like to take a moment to briefly set the stage. Now, the premise of today's discussion is inspired by a powerful statement that Swapan made last year during a panel discussion on nature-based solution for decarbonization. He said, "It will not be wrong to say that half the world this year was burning and half the world was flooded. Climate change is no longer a mere projection, it's a reality. And indeed, climate change is a reality, one that is impacting the world's poorest countries and, more importantly, the marginalized communities within these countries. These communities already grappling with poverty and its associated challenges are now facing the devastating impacts of climate shocks. Climate change is pushing them beyond their capacity to adapt, cope, or even survive. On a global scale, adaptation to climate change is recognized as essential. Yet, adaptation efforts often remain top down, ignoring the very people most affected. Despite the resilience and ingenuity of poor communities who have been navigating climate variability for decades, their indigenous knowledge and needs have often been excluded from adaptation strategies. Community based adaptation, or CBA, seeks to change this paradigm. It is a process that is led by the community, rooted in their priorities, needs, and capacities. It is about empowering individuals to plan for and respond to the impacts of climate change. This shift from a top down approach to community driven solution is both essential and overdue. However, scaling up CBA and turning participatory methods into effective policy responses presents significant challenges. One of the core issues is that marginalized communities, due to entrenched power structures, often lack the influence needed to shape policy or decision making. In today's seminar, we'll explore the following key questions. Number one, how is climate change impacting the lives of community? What is the historical evolution of CBA? What are the limitations of CBA? And how can we scale up CBA? To guide us through these important questions, we are fortunate to have Swapal, an environmental finance and climate policy expert with over 16 years of experience in developing climate change mitigation and adaptation projects. Swapal is also the founder CEO of Iora Ecological Solutions, one of India's leading environmental advisory firm. His work has enabled numerous climate action through integrated nature-based solutions, and he'll help us deepen our understanding on these critical issues. We'll open just a few things I wanted to clarify before I hand it over to Swapil. We'll open the floor for questions and reflections from our learners starting at 8 p.m. This is just for our Praxis learners. If you have a question or you would like to share your thoughts, simply raise your hand and we'll unmute you so that you can articulate your point. For others, you can always use the chat option to express your views, questions, and we'll try to raise them as much as we can during the meeting. Over to you, Swapan.
Thank you very much, Shruti. It's great to be here, and thank you for that very appropriate background and context. You've done my job easy. You've covered half of my presentation already, so we can have more questions and answers now. So I'd be very delighted, firstly, to share some thoughts, but at the same time, with the permission of Shruti, if you have questions or comments in between, please don't only type them. If it's very pertinent, please unmute and speak, and I'll stop and we can discuss as well. I don't mind at all, because it'll be wrong for me to say that we've thought through all solutions. We haven't. We all need to collaboratively think through what to do. I can only provide you a framework of the current thinking in the world, how it's evolving, but it's far from reaching a place where we've thought through what needs to be done, as is evident from the situation of climate around all of us. So we'll be very delighted to hear fresh perspectives, thoughts from the ground. That's the other issue. I think that very often, I think of this a lot nowadays because I myself have graduated mostly from learning on the ground, learning in the field, doing a lot of field work in my early days, even now. And I think that the disconnect between thinking from the ground versus top-down decision making is not more evident in any other area as it is in climate adaptation, because most of the approaches that we think of implementing are approaches that are either not appropriate or can't scalable, or one or the other. So with that background, if you allow me, I'll share my screen. Please let me know when my slides are visible. I'll use them as sort of a background for our conversation, but again, very happy to stop anytime and have a discussion. Perfect. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Great. So to begin with, I know that this is sort of preaching to the choir. All of you guys here understand and perceive climate change on a day-to-day basis, but I think it might be useful to just put this challenge in context. This is sort of a table which shows what's happening to the world right now and what's going to happen to the world if we allow climate change to grow unabated. Last year, we recorded that we had already reached an increase of 1.1 degrees centigrade. That was 3 years ago. The latest data shows that this year we'll breach 1.5 degrees. This is what now the IPCC and everybody is saying. When I started my career in about 15 years ago in climate change, the sort of the holy goal of all of us was to never allow the world to cross 1.5 degrees, because it was said that 1.5 degrees means large scale disasters, catastrophes, which the world is not prepared for. It's very interesting. I mean, I know that we are a very adaptable race, but it's also very interesting to see how we adapt to disaster. Now, the latest thought is that let's keep climate change below 4 degrees, because then there will be a catastrophe. One of the key reasons for this is that catastrophe is actually designed and defined by people who are actually not at the forefront of facing the impacts of the catastrophe, right? Because it's a narrative driven mostly by Western scientists, by organizations and individuals who are actually in a very good place to be able to wear out the challenges of climate change. So with that background, this is sort of a representation, a very good representation of analysis by the IPCC and Ministry of Earth Sciences, etc. So IPCC working group under the assessment 6, which is the latest assessment which came out, I think 2 or 3 years ago, said that if we allow the temperatures to reach 2 degree plus, which might happen by 2030 easily, the hottest days are going to be at least 2.5 degrees above the normal average. What this means is that every summer, Delhi is easily going to cross 50 degrees for at least a few days. Drought events will be more than double. Um, Precipitation intensity, the wettest days are going to be double the rain. So this is very interesting. One of the things that happening is that even though you hear this a lot, that overall the monsoons were normal, but the problem in rainfall that's happening is that even though the seasonal amount of water is more or less the same as what we are used to, the intensity of precipitation has changed a lot. So the number of days which sees excessive rainfall is very, very high now. And then the number of dry days are very high now. And the number of days which didn't see any rain are also seeing rain. So overall, your monsoon might be similar, but because of the increased intensity and variability, events of drought and flood have increased a lot. And this is something that you observe a lot in mainstream news now. Almost any time that you open news, there is some part of the world which has either seen very major landslides or is heavily flooded. This phenomena is also very true to India. India sees a lot more flooding now. And India sees a lot more occurrences of flood-related disasters. Then snow intensity, this is already declining. We all know our glaciers are already melting. The number of snow days from those of you who grew up in the hills have gone down drastically, because of which there is actually a huge prevalence of drought even in the Himalayan states of Uttarakhand, Himachal, etc. And cyclones are increasing. Even though tropical cyclones affect us lesser than many other countries, we are starting to see the effect. Last week we had a cyclone. Countries like the US are affected a lot more, even though even then climate change is still debated, which is very surprising, but the impacts are increasing. Um, India has observed an average increase in temperature of about 0.7 degrees in the last 4 or 5 years already, which is increasing. Um, and the summer monsoon prediction is that by 2015 it was supposed to be declining by 6%, and overall it will continue to decline. So India is in the throes of major challenges. Now, why is this relevant to all of you? I mean, from what I'm given to understand, you all work at the forefront of community development, community work, and unfortunately, the highest impact of climate change is borne by those who have the least capability to fight back or adapt, right? When you're very wealthy, you can always build a haven for yourself. You can relocate, you can get more air conditioning, you can buy water. But if you don't have the wherewithal to do all of that, then you're just at the mercy of nature. And if nature is starting to go awry, then there's nothing to protect you. And which is why the adaptation fight is very much a fight of India, of Africa, of countries who don't have so much capacity to be able to finance the resilience and adaptation of all their people. This is sort of forecasts in terms of what climate change will mean to various sectors in India. It is expected that in the next 3 or 4 decades, wheat yields will go down by 40 to 50%. Rice yields are expected to go down by 30 to 40%. Milk production is estimated to go down by 1.8 million tons. And on the whole, there is a risk. The World Bank predicts that by 2100, between 3 to 10% of our entire GDP could be lost due to climate change. You know, for the first time, the RBI has started doing analysis on what does climate risk mean to India's economy. It's a very real thing, and it can really, really affect us. There is a huge instances of increasing flooding. You keep hearing now every alternate year about a major GLOF, which is a glacial lake outburst flood. If you all remember the Sikkim disaster or the Uttarakhand disasters, these were related to a very large amount of water coming into flow in riparian systems which don't have the capacity to absorb that much water because of either damming or siltation, and then large scale disaster. Sea levels are rising, our coasts are threatened. What's also very, very fascinating, which we don't talk about a lot, is the shift in vegetation. There is a massive shift happening already, which some of you might have observed. But it is expected that in the next 3 or 4 decades, 50% of India's vegetation in forests is expected to shift. This means that there will be a huge impact on associated biodiversity, and to that extent, even an impact on people's livelihoods, which is related to biodiversity. Some of this is very evident. For example, people now, even in Kinnaur, I wonder if there is somebody from Himachal Pradesh here, and we'd love to hear our experiences. But people in Kinnaur are growing apples in the last decade, which was never the case till about, whatever, few years ago, because it was way above the apple growing belt. But with climate change, this is one of the few positive side effects, that people have more wealth there. But it also means that in the long run, you are losing your capability for evolution of natural species by converting forest or grasslands into these plantations just because the climate allows, and you're losing potential inherent value in biodiversity. It's very interesting that scientists say that we still haven't discovered 85% of biodiversity on Earth. And right now, because of mass deforestation and climate change, we are in the middle of the highest loss of biodiversity ever. The rate of loss is higher than the rate of loss at the end of the dinosaurs era. And at that time, an asteroid had struck Earth. This time it's purely humans, no external help needed. One of the issues with this is that 85% of the biodiversity is still not discovered. And scientists are predicting, if I remember correctly, that 60% of that might perish even before we discover it. The key issue here is that many of those biodiversity species could mean future food security in a climate scenario, could mean cures for very diseases. There could be one herb somewhere in Arunachal Pradesh which can potentially fight cancerous cells. We don't even know. We'll lose it before we even know. So a big disaster. On the health side, two major things. Of course, notwithstanding disasters, which have a huge impact on health, but on a regular basis, one is that the increase in vector-borne diseases with changing in precipitation, many more areas turning warmer, there is a possibility that the instances of vector-borne diseases like malaria are going to increase tremendously because just there will be more breeding habitat and suitable conditions, which means there could be outbreaks. And there are other vector-borne diseases, not only malaria. There are waterborne diseases, etc., for which our health system might not be fully prepared. The second very direct impact is heat waves and heat stress. If you all remember, you might have read in last year's news that there was a number of deaths in Delhi owing to the very high temperature. For very many people engaging in physical labor, working in 50 degrees is nearly impossible. Secondly, there are people who even perished because they did not have suitable conditions at home to even sleep in such high temperatures. There is a talk now in India about making cooling and air conditioning a fundamental right for people. We supported the World Bank in an analysis of the cooling needs in India. The World Bank is looking at pumping in some $700 million to increase the distribution of air conditioners. But even that's a drop in the ocean. Imagine the cost involved in providing cooling to maybe about 700 million people who don't have access to it. But also imagine the impact of that on an energy requirement, on deforestation. It goes on and on. It's a cycle, right? You start at one end, you come out at the other, but there is still a problem. So this is an issue. In each one of these, obviously, the biggest thing to do is to work on mitigation so that these eventualities don't happen. But the situation is slightly tenuous there. There is a lot of agreement around the world. Most countries have taken on targets to reduce emissions, go net zero by 2050, 60, 70. But the actual allocation of capital is very poor. You might have seen that in the recently concluded UN meeting, the developed countries have said that they'll put in $350 billion a year by 2030, which is a fraction of what is needed, which is in the trillions. And going by my experience, a lot of that money from the developed countries comes in the form of intellectual property, proprietary technologies like clean hydrogen, etc., which also go back to them. So it's a cycle process. The actual impact is difficult. Most critically, we will have to still be prepared for adaptation because A, we don't know if we will still win the mitigation war. Changes in government in the US, there is conflict in the world. Nobody knows whether that investment will flow. Even if it does start flowing, one of the key issues to remember is that all the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere right now, even if we were to stop emitting today, for the effect of that to go down would take about 30 years. So by then, we would still continue to, if not increase, but sustain this increase in global warming, which would have a lot of impacts that we all need to brace for. And we need our poor communities to brace for because they are at the forefront of these impacts. This is just some news articles showing how there are urban floods, how much money we are losing. There is crop damage, weather yields, weather increases resulting in reduction in yields of crops, heat-related deaths increasing, so on and so forth. One thing which always fascinates me when I look at data like this is that our governments, our communities, our individuals, we are willing to open our purses and spend thousands and thousands of crores on disaster relief because it is humanitarian, because it is the right thing to do. But trying to preemptively get that same capital for adaptation or mitigation is extremely hard. That's just the nature of how we are. And we all need to collectively work to inform society to change that, to unlock resources upfront. So I'll quickly talk about now India's response to climate change. India has been one of the most proactive responders to climate change, arguably. We have been active since the early 2000s. We were one of the first countries to launch a multi-sectoral national action plan on climate change, which had missions related to renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, greening forests or increasing forest cover, also missions on energy efficiency and strategic knowledge. Some of these have done exceptionally well, such as renewable energy. We are now, I think, the third highest installer of solar energy in the world. We have a lot of wind energy, so on and so forth. Some of these have done not so well, like the agriculture, sustainable agriculture mission has not been very successful because there was lack of clarity on outcomes. There wasn't enough funding. So is the Green India mission. Strategic knowledge has done moderately well because they've done a lot of efforts at capacity building. Some of you might have attended trainings funded by DST under this mission, etc. In 2015, we also became a signatory to the Paris Agreement and launched our own NDC. In our NDC, which is the nationally determined contribution, there were 5 goals: reducing emissions per capita per unit GDP, enhancing our carbon stocks by 2.5 to 3 billion, renewable energy of 30% of our grid, so on and so forth. We are doing relatively well on most of our goals. We've also now adopted that by 2070, we will become a net zero country. What that means is that our emissions will be equal to our sequestration in forests, in agriculture lands, etc. That's a major goal. That's one of the few large developed countries who's done that. China also has done that. The US has done that. But many other developing countries have not taken on these goals. Finally, our Prime Minister also launched a mission Life, lifestyle for a healthy environment. This is a unique mission. I believe it is a very well-intentioned mission, very difficult to implement, where what we are saying is that let's not only focus on large governmental action. How can each one of our individuals, each society member contribute to the battle on climate change by reducing our impact, by consuming more efficiently, etc. You might have heard of all of this. One thing that requires a lot more work is our adaptation planning. We have adaptation planning. There is a state action plan of climate change in every state. You guys might have seen that. And state action plans are predominantly based on adaptation. There is also an effort to set up a national adaptation plan, but it's going very slow. But one of the issues is that these state action plans are mostly not linked to resources. Sometimes they are not very well grounded. And I think it's very important for each one of us to actually start advocating for stronger implementation of our state action plans, of our intensity in terms of target setting for adaptation, and sparing resources from our budgets for adaptation and resilience. This is not an impossible task. There is something called the adaptation surplus, which is what that implies is that if you already have a Indira Awas Yojana, can you supplement the budget by 10% to make those houses climate resilient? If you have a scheme on watershed development, can you add the dimension of climate risk to focus on geographies which are more climate prone? Things like that requires some thinking, some pushing, and it requires us bringing climate change to the top of the agenda, to the agenda of our chief ministers, not only to lower level functionaries, which is very critical. Maybe one thing that I'd like to talk about here is that why this slide is slightly pertinent is that the UN has 3 major agreements. One is a biodiversity agreement, a climate agreement, and a desertification agreement. The reason why this is critical for all of you is that India is seeing a very large or a very high rate of land degradation. About 128 million hectares, I think, as per the government of India, is already degraded, and that is 1/3 of India. A large part of the degraded land is actually agricultural land, which is seeing massive degradation for various reasons. Runoff because of wind, because we leave it barren, runoff because of water, very high fertilizer use, etc., etc. Now, why is this a challenge? A few reasons. One is it affects our food security, affects our livelihood, and also has major local issues such as air pollution and so on and so forth. So India has a major goal to restore 21 million hectares of degraded land, 26 million by 2030. This goal hasn't trickled down very well to the ground level, but it should. But it's an important goal for us to remember. This is also important for us to highlight to our policymakers. In my experience, many of the states and governments are not really thinking. They think about agriculture for sure. Natural farming is a new trend or area that they're focusing on, but they're not focusing on the health of soil and land degradation as much as they should. While it's a subset of sustainable farming, it needs to be looked at as a very critical separate issue because of the rate at which it's increasing and the way it's threatening our country. So we discussed that vulnerable communities are the first impacted and the least prepared to face the brunt of climate crisis. They lack resources and they lack what we call adaptive capacity. Adaptive capacity is a function of basically resources, right? Resources and awareness and knowledge. Some of these gaps are very big, very large to bridge, which can only be done by large governments, large private sector. But some of these, and we'll talk about some examples, some funding models that can be exploited by all of us. But I also would like to mention that some of these gaps are not very large. They don't require massive resources. They just require sound interventions. Having a village prepared for flood may require early warning systems, but having the local infrastructure to fight flood to some extent, to fight fire to some extent, is something that we can do collectively as communities. Making sure that we are taking care of our natural resources, etc., is something that we potentially can do. So there are ways and means that we can kickstart the process of resilience building while we fight for the larger resources that need to flow into this sector. So, like I mentioned, traditionally, most of the climate action has been very top-down, focused on global goals such as reduced temperature, such as very large-scale action on forests in the Congo Basin, Amazon, very meta action on large places in which desertification is happening, such as the Sahara, such as such big areas. But there is also now an increasing recognition that maybe because of this large scale approach and not being contextualized to local solutions, there is a lapse in terms of success and implementation. And because of this, there is an increasing demand for bottom-up approaches, such as community participation-based approaches, analyzing solutions that work at the bottom of the pyramid, etc. I think all of you are very aware of this. But what's important here is that while you all continue to do this, I think it's important to also eloquently starting to voice this, that solutions that come from the very top need to be evaluated on the local context. The large funding that comes in forms of climate funds, etc., needs to be divided into micro tranches, which are customized to local implementation. I think the demand for this needs to increase. The awareness of our policymakers for all of this needs to increase. The chronicling of indigenous responses to disasters needs to increase. You know, how we have been able to respond in the past, can we now amplify that with science? These are things that we need to start actively talking about and advocating. So I've already mentioned there's a growing importance of community-based initiatives. These are initiatives that bridge the gap between the top and below, and which talk about reducing vulnerability, majorly from climate, strengthening livelihoods and food security. So there's a lot of focus on this. All the major treaties now have separate sections in which they refer to the rights and access to capital for indigenous people, for communities, etc. But a very difficult thing to achieve in practice. So community-based response to climate change, firstly, very importantly, in many cases has a dual impact, both on adaptation and mitigation. You can do both. One of the reasons why there is an important link to connect these two is from a financing standpoint, because you should be able to leverage both pools of financing, right? A larger pool of money is available through mitigation. An example is carbon credits, which many of you must be either seeing on the field now or must have read about, must be thinking about. And the beauty of community-based mitigation is that automatically most of those projects also lead to resilience. I'll give you an example. Industrial decarbonization, such as large-scale wind projects or energy efficiency in industry, don't have that much of an adaptation dimension. But community-based mitigation projects such as agroforestry, reforestation, community-based energy access away from the grid through solar sources, micro irrigation, reducing the energy requirement for large irrigation, fertilizer reduction to get carbon credits, all of these also have a dimension of adaptation. So this is one way for you to be able to access resources. There is also an increasing pool of resources and opinion on actual adaptation. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So these are sort of like this is sort of a very generic pathway of how you can design community-based approaches. Very important to first do a diagnostic of the key climate risk and degradation. This climate risk data is a very critical piece, which is available in some cases. Many states have been able to do, and people like us, our organization, many others continue to generate these data sets. In some cases, available at a 1 kilometer square grid, but at least available at a block level. Most state action plans have this. There is a platform built by IIT Delhi in which you can, at least I think at a block or district level, go and identify climate risks. This is good to inform your decisions of resilience actions, but can also be a very strong argument to put in potential climate proposals to be able to raise resources. Designing adaptations effectively, doing good community-based monitoring, and then designing very good benefit transferring systems are other cases here. This is very critical, guys, especially in market-driven approaches. So, I'll give you examples. There was a big news 3 days ago that a project in Punjab on carbon credits in which farmers were given some money has now been blocked because of adverse comments. One of the many reasons for many projects like this not having high credibility is that the communities don't have agency or authority or knowledge to be able to argue or advocate for the right share of benefits. When you're asking 10,000 farmers in a village to grow trees to reduce climate impacts, the carbon sequestration service that they are generating is a service that they essentially own. In many cases, there are intermediaries who would come and take 40 to 50% of the carbon benefit, uh, you know, because they have access to greater knowledge. It's important for community advocates like you to strengthen the agency of the community so that in future emerging resource flows because of climate change, the community has more agency to take what is rightfully theirs because the risk is all theirs. Why should the reward not be? We can talk about this more. This is sort of a long list of, or not so long, but an exemplary list of community-based climate actions that many of you must already be doing, but these are actions for many of which you can get financing from the carbon markets or from climate funds, etc. On the one hand, there is disaster preparedness, early warning systems, disaster infra, training on disaster response. There is a lot of investments going into this from the government. There is also investment into this from international funds, green climate funds, so on and so forth. There is regenerative agriculture securing nutrition. There is forest conservation. There is climate smart agriculture. There is water conservation. Many of these actions are cross-cutting and have both adaptation and mitigation benefits. And where you have both benefits, you can identify and get investments from both kinds of investors, merge it at a community level. Critical to do so. There are many organizations trying to do so, but in the ideal world, it will be great if communities can self-organize to be able to, through FPOs, through panchayats, be able to access this funding in a fair manner. There are various sources for finance that one can leverage. There is the carbon markets. Happy to speak about this in greater detail. There are various funds to which you can bundle various community initiatives and seek financing from. There is the Green Climate Fund, national funds. A lot of CSR and philanthropy are now turning their eyes towards climate change. We meet many such organizations daily. I'm sure TRI does the same, who are now saying that they want to invest in natural resources or disaster preparedness. Of course, we have to understand that this is a limiting pool of resources. So I'm very wary when I listen that 80% of CSR will now go to climate because our demands are so many. We still need to invest in health. We still need to invest in education. What would be ideal is if you can dovetail all of this, invest in climate and health, climate and education, education that leads to greening. But those are some things that we can collectively work on and debate. Specific to the carbon market is a major pool of resources. A number of projects in the agriculture and forestry space are eligible, and this is something in which there is significant interest now. If you can pull together a few thousand hectares of land and a few farmers who are interested in either going organic, reducing water consumption, reducing fertilizer, growing trees, you can monetize a lot of this asset and get them real value. We are doing this in large parts of the country, several hundred projects, and there is a scope for many more. Now, this is on the mitigation side. One very important thing that I'd like to talk about is on climate vulnerability assessment and climate risk. The reason why I want to talk about this is twinfold. One is that if you want to advocate for higher financing on the vulnerability side, it's very important to first identify what the vulnerability is. The second major reason to do this is that, guys, we don't have this database. So I'll explain to you what vulnerability is. Vulnerability is the overlap of climate exposure, climate hazards, and adaptive capacity. The vulnerability is the inability to cope with climate change, and the overlap of exposure and vulnerability leads to what is climate risk. So vulnerability and risk are very poorly understood for large parts of the country. What we are able to generate, or IIT is able to generate using modeling, using remote sensing data, is impacts. And that too, only numeric impacts. So how much is the change in precipitation and what is the increase in temperature? This left side, this climate impact data, we can easily, not easily, but we can generate. This is still available through sophisticated models. Vulnerability and risk is, what does that mean for your locality, your people? That is a function of socioeconomic pathways, adaptive capacity, how is the governance, how is the social fabric of that region. Vulnerability and risk needs to be assessed very locally. So it's important because without this, the strategies that we are all implementing can go wrong in various ways, or you can't attract the right finance. I can give so many examples. A lot of carbon project developers now who don't understand local socioeconomic details, who don't understand long-term climate vulnerability, might be unknowingly locking in our farmers into agricultural systems such as tree-based systems of a certain species, millet-based systems, so on and so forth, which might not even be suitable for cultivation in that area 5 years or 10 years from now. What do you expect the farmers to do? Now they've taken an ultimate opportunity cost and changed the land use into a certain thing and invested their own capital in addition to whatever they get. But if it's not properly designed and if it leads to local issues in terms of food security, or in future, if there is a risk of climate on the plantation itself, you've locked in your farmers into an asset which is not of great use to them. So it's important in order to assess this vulnerability. In order to assess the vulnerability and the risk, it's very important to have data collection locally. Initially, this can even be perception based, that what would a delta in climatic parameters of this extent in the next 10 years mean for this region. On a more normative basis, you can do surveys to understand the potential of response of people based on what assets they own, what assets they don't own, and come up with composite vulnerability scores. There is a lot of literature and science on this, but it's important to do this, if not empirically because of resource constraints, at least intuitively. And we can talk about this in greater detail. Once you have climate risk assessed, then you can come up with management strategies. This is obvious because your responses, all your responses in that region would be informed by the actual risk. Who is the most at-risk population? What is the largest risk? Is the largest risk in a certain area GLOF-based flood? In that case, how can we inform the preparedness of people? Is the largest risk crop failure? How can we inform the preparedness of the people? Is the largest risk fire? Then so on and so forth. And then is the largest risk shifting of vegetation? That's much more nuanced. But if we know this, we can. Also very critical that the risk management is identified participatorily, because our communities are very resilient. They also have thoughts and ideas on how we can build these adaptive frameworks. The second is, if they're involved in the process, they are more likely to follow the process. So this is critical. This is sort of the list of, again, I'm sorry, this should be earlier, but this is the list of, and you guys will have the presentation so you can take a look at it. But all the various kind of projects that can get carbon finance, again, crop rotation, intercropping, biofertilizers, organic fertilizer, biochar, efficient cook stoves, biogas plants, afforestation, so on and so forth. There are various funds, the Green Climate Fund, the National Adaptation Fund. You can bundle together areas and apply for this funding, and then get access. This is sort of an analysis that we did a few years ago, actually, for UNDP on changing shifts in CSR spending. This is probably even more pronounced now, but even when we did the analysis, we saw that a lot of CSR funding was actually shifting towards the environment. Clean energy, forestry, water were getting, actually, if you see, a majority of funding. The interest in this is very increased now, and of many companies that we meet are actually struggling to find really good projects which are implemented very well at a micro scale. So there is an opportunity. Many companies actually are willing to do much smaller transactions, so on and so forth. I have a few examples that I can take you through, and then we can actually stop and have more of a discussion. This is an example of some work that we did in Gujarat, actually with GIZ and Mars, the company that makes the Mars candy. It's a chocolate that has a peanut element to it. And we worked in Junagadh with several thousand farmers, in which we engage with modelers from IIC, etc., to do a very, very high resolution climate risk assessment. This is where we did 1 square kilometer. Once we did a 1 square kilometer climate assessment, then we did an entire socioeconomic analysis of vulnerability, adaptive capacity to respond to that. And then we were able to come up with certain adaptation strategies to ensure the right amount of moisture, different feedstock, community capability of storage, etc., of the peanut crop. And the company invested in all of that, because we were able to link the risk of the farmers with risk of the company, because they need supply. So the company continues to invest in the action plan that we made. And this we feel is an interesting impact and outcome of a good vulnerability assessment. We worked with IUCN in Bihar, in Munnar, to come up with a new framework called Agriscapes, in which we actually did a very minute on-ground assessment of the interplay between conserving natural forests in the vicinity of agriculture landscapes, and how that can build resilience in agriculture by ensuring moisture, by ensuring soil health. We even studied pollinators, and we did a delta in the number of pollinators in agriculture landscapes near forest and away from forest. Based on this, ITC replicated it in all their major sourcing regions of wheat, of paddy, and now they're investing. They've created a big CSR program to invest in natural resource management near their agriculture landscapes, involving communities, additional livelihood, better resilience. Many examples of community-based entrepreneurs. W Power is a very well-known example in which 100,000 women have been made entrepreneurs to sell and deploy clean cooking, saving a lot of wood, reducing the resilience on natural resource, but also building health. There is a very good example of community-based microclimate by the Gorakhpur Environmental Action Group, in which they are actually building new resilience techniques through one is training, but also using local building material to make more climate resilient houses. This is very interesting. There is an architect in Delhi that we worked with once, who specializes in indigenous building material of India, who talks about how a traditional building material was much more climate resilient. our traditional stone houses, our traditional ventilation techniques, some part of Vastu which focuses on which side your house should face, etc. She noted that in houses built with traditional material, in winters your house would be 2 degree warmer, and in summers 2 degree cooler than modern houses, reducing the need for air conditioning, but also building more resilience. So there is many such examples. More efficient use of water. Tarun Bharat Sangh, you know this very well. This organization works on techniques for reducing the requirement of water by better irrigation techniques and traditional wisdom. Water adaptation is critical because our water resources are dying. The more we reduce our consumption, the more we increase our resilience, reduce dependence, so on and so forth. I'm actually going to stop there. Okay, maybe one or two more slides. This is our work in Assam, where we help them build the state action plan on climate change. Now, this is more of a top-down analysis in which we did high-resolution vulnerability assessment of all of Assam, and then we ranked the districts on vulnerability, and then we also identified through not very extensive, but through some stakeholder consultation as to what were the drivers of vulnerability. Was it less vegetation? Was it less irrigation? Was it less crop insurance? Was it less capacity on high dependence of communities on irrigated agriculture, so on and so forth? So this sort of analysis as a starting point exists for many states in India, which can be sort of a basis for deeper analysis. And look, then for two sectors, we ranked all the districts on how much is their vulnerability for food crop production. Now, this analysis further needs to be built on at a sub-district level by more engagement as to within the district, which community is more vulnerable to which kind of climate risk in order to allow for more specific strategies. We did the same for Uttar Pradesh. We did the state action plan where we did a slightly higher resolution, 25 square kilometer vulnerability. And then we did district by district, sorry, climate impact and district by district vulnerability on all the drivers. And some of the drivers we identified there was deforestation, water stress, extreme rainfall, poor access to electricity, and then we ranked all the districts. This is just some of our work. We try and support the government on various ways in which we can we can enhance government's investment in nature, reduce climate action, including we did the roadmap for India for its Paris Agreement goal. We did the roadmap for India for its 2070 net zero goal. We did the formula for the Finance Commission based on which Indian states got 4.5 lakh crore rupees for their forest cover. Unfortunately, a lot of that is not translated into investment, but so on and so forth. Perfect. I'm going to stop here and would be very happy to answer any questions or hear your comments or even criticism, but whatever you guys would like to share. I know that's a lot of information. You know why sometimes this is useful to do this in person, because you can see when it's getting too much and then you can pause. I couldn't see any of your faces here, so I'm sorry I've downloaded everything, but happy to go back to any slide and discuss more or in general.
Swapan, I think you're on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was saying never a good sign when there are no questions.
No, I'm sure.
Either this is crystal clear or not clear at all.
No, actually, I was trying.
Hello.
Sorry, I am being auto muted twice. I'm audible right now.
Yeah, you are. Could you just introduce yourself and then?
I'm Akhilesh, and I am working in SM Cycle Foundation as a program lead, and I am looking after SDFC Parivartan projects all throughout the locations. So particularly, my role is to integrate and manage the program, particularly of agricultural development and integrated projects, largely related to water management, agriculture, education, and partially of health and nutrition. So, particularly what I wanted to ask, because our geography to work is mostly in the northern belts and central belts. So, in case of any example, if I can get from Haryana, particularly, or say Punjab, any such kind of community action which I mean, any organization has done so far?
Swapan, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you very much. So Punjab, there is a lot of very interesting work being done on community behavior change for regenerative agriculture and fire management. There is an organization, Vetiver, who's actually working with 300,000 farmers and very interestingly using gamification and religious messaging for behavior change in communities towards less fire and more regenerative farming. They've had a lot of success there. So there's a very good example of that. Nestle is doing some very good work through CSR in Punjab on regreening of pasture lands. So happy to connect with you separately and give you some examples. You can get my email and we'll be happy to connect you to some people. Haryana, again, there has been some very, very good work on livestock management by the Haryana Gaw Ayog, supported through a number of different CSR funds, and the state has set aside a budget for better livestock management. In Haryana, one other thing which we are also involved in, which is very slow to take off, is this whole idea of the Aravali Green Belt, in which, so you'll be surprised to know that the Aravali Desert has reached now, I think, about 5 kilometers of Gurgaon. It's almost reached Delhi because of desertification. One of the big reasons that you have this air pollution in Delhi, 10 to 20% of that is actually the Thar desert sand, which is now blowing into Delhi. So because of massive mining and degradation of the Aravali's. So there is a big project going on there. Some parcels of that are doing very well. So yeah, we'll be happy to connect you with some of these case studies and also people who are working on these.
Thanks.
I think Rashi has her hand raised. Rashi.
Yes, hello, thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. I think it was truly very informative. My name is Rashi, and I work with iForest currently as a senior research associate. So my question was that, when you're doing all the exciting projects, is there also monitoring and evaluation done later to understand if the community is, for example, backtracking from what you had, implemented? Did you see any changes like that, or was it ever done?
So, this is a great question. There are two things. One is that the programmatic cycle of many of these, especially climate adaptation projects, is only about 5 to 6 years. And, we were just discussing this. We had a meeting yesterday for many organizations at Shakti Foundation on how do we change the way all of us are working to better inform agriculture and land in India. And we were discussing this, that it's such a big challenge that in India, it's almost impossible to get programmatic finance for more than 10 years, right? If you were to sustain a lot of this, then even the program coordinator needs long-term funding. So sometimes it's a challenge. One of the advantages of carbon finance here is, so for example, we are working in Meghalaya on a 150,000 hectare restoration carbon project. We've done the first 15,000 now. And there, our financing is linked to the cycle of the project. So we have a 60 people team there which will remain there for the next 30 years. And because there is the financing comes based on performance, there is an incentive for everybody to be aligned. So the key thing is to align ourselves to this whole idea of reward-based finance. How can we do programs where the financing comes on reward and everybody's aligned? It's difficult in conventional development because conventional development, everybody wants to put a lot of capex, but not long-term opex. But we all need to creatively think how we can flip that model. Can we use models where we get developmental finance, put that into funds which release annuity over a period of time, etc. I mean, the whole world is grappling with this, but it's a challenge. In carbon, this is one big advantage, that you can align yourself for 30 years, 20 years and be linked to performance. So we have many such programs on forest restoration, land restoration, where our teams are there, will be there for a very long time. In some of the projects like the peanut work that we did, our hope is that we do the work and hand over to somebody like a Mars and the local FPO there, who have a permanent in perpetuity agreement, right? Because they are going to work together till the Mars, a company, exists. And the hope is that they sustain it. Same is for ITC. But we had to withdraw after 3 years because our resources expired. And that's a challenge. It's a true challenge.
Right. Thank you so much.
Anybody else? Or should we just start asking people to unmute and speak and share what they think about climate change? I think we should do that randomly now. I want to hear your thoughts, what you're doing on the field, what you're experiencing. What can I learn from your experiences? Anybody? Is anybody feeling generous enough to share some ideas? Amit.
Yeah.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Hi, Sapan. First of all, you very beautifully and in a very detailed manner described all the nuances of this concept of climate change, right from the talks in US and conference of parties and to the grassroots at the community level. So I just want your help in understanding a very fundamental concept that when there's a debate between developed and developing countries about climate change, then the argument that again and again comes to the table is that historically developed countries has caused more of climate change in comparison to the developing one. So they in a way fight to just evade their responsibilities and to, like, developing countries they want to use coal for a longer period so that they can also gain economic advantage that the developed countries has done in the past. Now, when this debate gets percolated to the grassroots level, at the community level, because I am posted in Rajnandgaon in Chhattisgarh, so here we are running a drive. Paddy is the major crop that is being grown here, and that is very water intensive. So we are talking to farmers to shift from paddy to some other crops like maize. So while discussing, the argument comes that the government and the decision makers or the policy makers are unproportionately putting the burden of climate change on farmers or the community level people without focusing on industries. Or if they are doing so, then the grassroots level community is not aware of the effort that the industry is taking to evade the climate change notion. And if the industry is doing something, then it is not causing them structural changes or overnight changes. But the community is feeling, like the farmers are feeling, that they are forced to adopt some techniques or tools to change themselves or their production techniques overnight. So they are in a state of frustration that this whole concept of they sometimes speak like Trump, that this is hoax. The climate change is a hoax. I have heard this argument from farmers. So I just want to understand that when the universal argument of developed versus developing country, of the shared common but shared differentiated responsibility gets to the community level, then how we should talk to farmers and how we should understand the whole concept within our boundaries, within our country. I hope that I have communicated my thought in a manner.
No, you have.
Understandable manner.
You have. It's a very, very, very critical issue because you're right. Just like we've been arguing internationally that the US is a bigger driver of climate change, India is not. So you should pay a bigger bill, we should not. It's absolutely the same, right? Industries and urban developers are bigger contributors to climate change than our rural communities. And the bigger cost of climate change will be paid by rural communities because they'll have more resilience issues. You and I can put an AC in our house and we can still survive the worst summer in Delhi. But if water scarcity, we will get a tank from the Delhi Development Authority, but that's not going to happen. So they'll also bear the biggest cost. The problem now is, and this is an absolutely important issue, is that, which is why I'm saying that we need to build agency of our communities to ask for more. So now the farmer who has to fight soil degradation, who has to fight challenges in subsidy, who has to fight challenges in market pricing, we still don't have a market information system, who has to fight water scarcity. Now we also want that farmer to do climate mitigation for us, climate resilience for us, smart cropping for us, without giving any additional revenue. Why should they? So I think that you're absolutely right that what we are asking for is actually unreasonable without putting a cost on the rest of society. And which is why these models such as carbon finance, subsidy share, PM Pranam is a very good example. If we utilize it fully, the benefit should go straight to farmers, and we need to build their agency to be able to ask for the right amount. And we need to encourage our governments to do so. By we are able to do a direct benefit transfer to people in terms of laptops for school and this and that and the other. Why can't we give money to farmers to go green? We should give cash. We should design systems like that. And we should do cash at a much higher level than usual. Why is it that in carbon projects, farmers don't get 90% of the money? I am telling you as a developer that in most projects, no developer needs more than 20% to be profitable. Everywhere, developers keep 60%. There is nobody regulating this. So you are right. We need to, what I think you need to tell your farmers is that you are now providing an additional service to society, and we should collectively bargain with society that if you want us to provide this additional service, bear the cost for it. Bear the cost for not only the transition, but bear the cost for the opportunity cost. What if tomorrow I shift into sustainable paddy and my yield decrease? There should be a guaranteed payment. So I think we need to build the case for it. You are absolutely right, because this is a problem.
Thanks.
Hello. Hi. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question. I mean, you were talking about incentivizing farmers and their interest in adapting. But on that same thing, when you were talking about vulnerability assessment, I also wonder that you made a statement that keep risk assessment of risk of the farmer as risk of the corporate or of the company. Now, when you this is just a question in the sense that when you've communicated the risk of the farmers and the fact that the production and food security isn't going to be as secured, how have the corporates usually responded to it? As in, like, because they can always go to alternative sources of procurement, whereas that farmer community, they don't have that option. So can this risk assessment be also be counterproductive to the community in the sense that they lose that source of livelihood? And what are the ways one can navigate this tightrope?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, look, there are two things. One is that there are some corporates who actually are mapping their value chain risk and are interested in investing to de-risk, because that for any major corporate, the transaction cost of building a new value chain, Shruti, is tremendously high. Because you've established your warehouse system and your procurement system, and your processing plant is close to a certain amount of farmers. The issue is, and some of them see this, the issue is that many of them see this but don't want to invest in it, because for two reasons. They say the same that you say, that this is an open market, we can source for somewhere else, but they truly can't. The problem is, it's a question of collective bargaining versus individual bargaining, right? If we are able to collectively bargain on behalf of a large number of suppliers, corporates don't have much of a choice, because imagine the cost for a ex corporate to relocate its dairy plant from Punjab to Haryana. It's a 100 million expenditure. They might say that we can buy from somebody else, but that somebody else has to be in a 20-kilometer radius, right? Now, the issue is that do we have the wherewithal to get everybody in the 20-kilometer radius to collectively bargain for the risk premium? That transaction cost, nobody is willing to bear right now. A, there is lack of agency. B, to get somebody like a TRI or a Iora to even do that, the transaction cost is so huge that you need a few $1 million in grant to cover one catchment. Nobody's willing to do, because it's a very non-tangible issue, right? Like, who will give you a grant to bring farmers together to negotiate with the corporate? That's the key issue. Wherever there are collectives, they are able to bargain. Internationally, it happens a lot. Coffee farmers in Ghana are now cutting a very good deal with Nestle to give them a premium. But the same we are not able to replicate very effectively because of the fragmented nature of our market, and honestly because of our government procurement systems. Because end of the day, both sides see that as a backup, ना कि और कुछ नहीं होता यहाँ बेच देंगे और कुछ नहीं होता यहाँ खरीद लेंगे. So that's one of the reasons why this is there, but it's not that easy for the corporates to. In fact, it's way more difficult for the corporates to shift. Like Amit mentioned, he mentioned that structural changes for a corporate, they make a very sound rationale that, and the rationale that they will make is that if the government doesn't support us through a structural change, 10,000 people will lose their jobs. They don't make the rationale that they'll go out of business. That is the bigger rationale, right? People will lose jobs, that's great, but what about you? You will lose your whole balance sheet. So how are we able to maneuver? It's a question of that. It's the same question as India and America. What leverage do we have? If we had enough leverage to tell America that we'll impose sanctions on you if you don't payers for climate change, we would have. We don't have that leverage. Can we create the leverage by bringing coalitions? We have been trying. It's not easy, right? So it's plays out at a similar level.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. That clears it completely. Others, you can type in the chat box also in case your network isn't supporting. You can just always type it and we'll raise the question.
Shruti, in the meanwhile, can you tell me a little bit more about this program? Like, how do you select the fellows? And what's the key goal? I didn't get a chance to read too much.
Yeah. So the idea is actually to bring a synthesis of public policy, academic theory, and the practice that they do. So we have placed fellows who are young public policy professionals who have worked in the development sector and other eclectic sectors also in the work life. And we have selected them. It's a three-step. I mean, Pritha would be much more equipped to say the recruitment, inform you about the recruitment process. But the larger idea is that we place these professionals in public administrations of the districts that I mentioned, from the states that I mentioned. And they support the district administration in livelihoods, climate change, landscape restoration. They're working on different projects, but more or less, they also work on a personal intervention that so they get a 2-year time period. So we have a whole system of first they'll diagnose the field for 6 months, and they will come up with a problem solution articulation, then an intervention design, and they'll do one iteration of it. And by the end of it, we'll write a practitioner's guide / dissertation because it's going to be more academic in tone and orientation.
Okay.
So that's the sense. Pritha, do you want to inform Swapan about the recruitment process and how we go at it?
Sure. So we have a 4-step. Before I start, I'll just introduce myself briefly. I'm Pritha. Hi. I assist. I'm also assistant coordinator along with Shruti, and I majorly look on in communications and in the recruitment process. So yeah, so going back to the question, we have a 5-step admission process. We have a resume and SOP shortlisting. After that, we conduct an online assessment test where we do a sociometric kind of a test, see how good, how their adaptive levels, how they are as leaders and things like that. After the assessment, we do a group. We have a written assignment that is sent to them. We ask them to do a policy briefing basically, and that is a very crucial level of our recruitment. After that, we invite the applicants for a group discussion and a personal interview. So people who clarify this very extensive process are then selected for as a Praxis learner. After they are selected, then we host a boot camp. A 15-day boot camp is usually held in Delhi. For the past 2 years, we've been holding it in Delhi itself. There the learners, it's a residential boot camp, so people selected from all over the India, they come, we host them, we have lots of fun, a lot of learning. And from the bootcamp itself, we are then we place them into the different geographies as from there the journey begins. So that really is the process.
No, that's very interesting. I didn't know about this before. I'd very much like to discuss if a climate resilience part can be added to everybody's personal project in everything that they're doing, and that'll be a very good experience, impactful, and C, it could become a really interesting sort of database of potential localized actions that we can really project upwards into state policy all over the country. So would love to explore that. Very happy to talk to any one of them or who are interested and help them do that, and then collate that data, because I think this is one of the things which is missing right at the moment. we do climate risk at a national and a state level, it never percolates down into actual ground action. Some actions are happening. Some states are taking policy proactive decisions, but it's not very tailored to local context. So this is a great opportunity. What a lovely program. I didn't know of this before. Thank you.
That's actually the intent of inviting you and saying,
थैंक यू स्वपन जी, नमस्कारम।
नमस्कार सर, कैसे हैं?
एकदम बढ़िया है। आपको नहीं पता है तो कैसे चलेगा काम। तो आपको अच्छे से ब्रीफ करते हैं, और हम लोग का नहीं एकदम पर्सनल प्रोजेक्ट लेना है। हमारे ना कलीग्स आर ऑन दी कॉल और ऑन दी जूम। वी हैव टू identify these projects, and there could not be any better learning than under your mentorship and Iora's support. If they can find something at the district level, that would be fabulous.
Hanji sir. No, we'll be very happy to. If we can identify climate adaptation project, we'll be very happy to support, guide in whatever way. And most importantly, बहुत जरूरी है कि उसको document करके then we project it upwards. क्योंकि वो evidence है ही नहीं अभी ना, अब ground level action की evidence बहुत poorly scattered है. उसको अगर हमने दे दिया अलग अलग सोशो इकोनॉमिक और एग्रोक्लाइमेटिक जोन से, तो बड़ा एक यूजफुल टूल बनेगा फॉर अस टू एडवोकेट फॉर मोर इन्वेस्टमेंट्स.
Absolutely. I think many of our colleagues in Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand, in these districts, there is a project around this. So there would be an opportunity. I think we should follow it up, both Shruti and Pritha, with all the colleagues to identify those spaces.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल सर, we'll be happy to.
So thank you. तुम्हारा इतना बढ़िया, it was so fabulous and so insightful. And such a structured way of communication. मैंने तुम्हारा सुना नहीं था पहले, but this was really very good learning opportunity for someone like me, and I'm sure for our colleagues it must be.
No, thank you sir, very humbling coming from you. Thank you very much. जी.
Sir, I have a question.
हाँ जी दीप्ति, yes please.
जी, sir, मुझे currently I'm placed in Prayagraj as a fellow, and I'm working in the health domain with the chief medical officer here. So this year had been a very, Prayagraj is also the confluence of the three rivers, and this year there were too much rainfall had been for a very elongated time period. And with respect to that, during my tenure only, I was able to see that how the flood situation impacted the communities. So this was a very always I had heard it, but facing the realities and interacting with the communities and how the changes were impacting them and their daily personal lives was a very eye-opening. So I just wanted to ask that how do these climate change exacerbate these public health challenges, and how the जो भी ये community-based programs, adaptation और resilience programs फॉर्मुलेट होते हैं, तो उसमें हेल्थ इंडिकेटर्स कितने लेवल तक कंसिडर किए जाते हैं? क्योंकि हेल्थ तो इट्स I know the livelihood linkages, but with respect to health, वो कितना inculcate किया जाता है?
थैंक यू दीप्ति. सो एक तो क्या है कि जो हमारे स्टेट एक्शन, देखो अभी ना हमारी यूनिट फॉर क्लाइमेट रेजिलियंस प्लानिंग स्टेट की है, और स्टेट में जब हम स्टेट एक्शन प्लान और क्लाइमेट चेंज बनाते हैं, उसमें जो हमको रिस्क और वल्नरेबिलिटी असेसमेंट करना होता है, उसमें इम्पैक्ट ऑफ क्लाइमेट चेंज एंड हेल्थ इज वन पैरामीटर. ठीक है. Now, in addition to that, there is a national mission on climate change and health, which is run by the National Disease Control Center under Ministry of Health. As per that, every state is actually supposed to come up with a separate plan on climate change and health, जो कि अभी बहुत कम states ने बनाया है. अप्रूव तो मेरे ख्याल से एक दो का ही हुआ है खाली. उस प्लान में टेक्निकली स्पीकिंग इनको हर डिस्ट्रिक्ट वाइज जो वल्नरेबल हॉटस्पॉट्स एंड जो पोटेंशियल रिस्क ड्यू टू क्लाइमेटिक इवेंट्स हैं, उसको क्रॉनिकल करके उसकी प्रिपेयर्डनेस के स्टेप्स और बजट करना होता है. दे कैन एक्चुअली इवन गेट फंडेड. दूसरी चीज, there is ample amount of resources available for health preparedness from even outside the government. World Bank के कई programs हैं, Bill and Melinda Gates से कई programs हैं. The issue is that there aren't enough well-informed proposals एंड द अदर इशू इज कि इसमें थोड़ा साइंस का भी एक गैप है कि व्हाट इज द मोस्ट कॉस्ट इफेक्टिव इंटरवेंशन। अब आपके जैसे वाटर बोर्न डिजीज आप बोल रहे हो, दो तीन तरीके के हैं। एक तो आपके वेक्टर बोर्न हो गए, आपके मलेरिया वगैरह, फिर आपके कन्वेंशनल वाटर बोर्न डिजीज हैं, आपका कॉलेरा आउटब्रेक या जो भी, मतलब अलग अलग होते हैं वाटर बोर्न डिजीज। अब उनके कंट्रोल के लिए व्हाट इज द बेस्ट थिंग? इज देयर preventive way of giving preventive medicine? Is there way of giving inoculation and vaccines? Is the right way of disease control? उसके ऊपर जो साइंस है ना, एवरीबडी हैज डिफरेंट परसेप्शंस, तो उसमें इफ सम रियल साइंस कैन बी गॉटन, इट्स एक्चुअली दिस इज अ वेरी गुड पायलट प्रोजेक्ट। अगर आप इसके ऊपर एक डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल या ब्लॉक लेवल भी एक पायलट आप क्लाइमेट एंड हेल्थ का प्रपोजल जनरेट करें ना, दैट कैन बिकम अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग रोल मॉडल विच द यूपी गवर्नमेंट कैन देन स्केल अप। यूपी में इस पे काफी काम हो रहा है एक्चुअली, इट इज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट प्रोएक्टिव स्टेट्स नाउ ऑन क्लाइमेट प्लानिंग। तो उसके बेसिस पे दे कैन बी रिसोर्सेज विच कैन बी गिवन एंड देयर कैन बी प्रिवेंटिव वर्क दैट कैन बी डन। अभी उसके ऊपर बहुत कम काम हुआ है, उसके जो स्टेट प्लान्स ही अप्रूव नहीं है, बट ये सब कवर्ड है। इनॉक्यूलेशन से लेकर, वैक्सीन से लेकर, एडवांस मेडिसिन स्टॉकिंग से लेकर, ट्रेनिंग एंड कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग से लेकर, देन डिजीज कंट्रोल, ये सब चीजें आर सपोज टू बी कवर्ड अंडर अ प्लान एट अ डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल। एंड नंबर वन एक तो ये हो गया। फिर दूसरा है इन केस ऑफ फ्लड्स एंड ऑल, आपका जो डिजास्टर साइड ऑफ गवर्नमेंट किक्स इन, उसके अंडर भी। बट इसमें इशू पता है क्या है? उनका क्विक रिस्पॉन्स होता है, रश द मेडिसिन। उसके बियॉन्ड जो है ना, साइंटिफिक प्लानिंग की थोड़ी कमी है। I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you. But there is a number of policy avenues to cover this. The issue is that local empirical evidence-led planning nahi hai, which can then take use of those instruments.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I had a question. I'm Austin. I'm posted in UP Hamirpur. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes, ask me.
So I just wanted a ground tip from you, as in like it just popped in my head that we see government to drive infrastructural changes. They have chopped off a number of trees, and it has a great impact on climate. And like when we go to the ground and if we ask the communities to drive from a certain crop to another in order to trying to make them understand, this is because we are doing because of this climate change and all of that. How do we counter this? Like, since we will be going as like government representatives, as we are working with the district administration, sometimes we might encounter this problem. I have never, encountered anybody with this, but now that, this is a very burning topic and I would like to explore more here in UP, I was just trying to understand, like, if you can give me a ground tip, like how do I go and convince the people or maybe tell them more about it, like trying to draw maybe like like if you're getting my question.
I am getting your question. Okay, let me clarify what I got and then you can explain more.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that if you want to incentivize people to shift towards more climate friendly practices, what is the rationale to use there? Correct?
Yeah, when we already see government, to drive infrastructural changes, they're already, like they're felling
That's
off
true.
hundreds of
That's
trees
true.
to drive up to build a bridge and all of that. So how do we counter that?
That's true. That's a very good point, that when the big brother is doing negative things, how do you get the citizens to then become responsible? देखो मेरे इसके दो आंसर हैं। एक तो सबसे पहले, what is the meaning of your name Ostami? I've never heard this name before.
So the meaning of Ostami is literally the digit 8. I was born during Janmashtami, so my
Acha,
grandfather
Ashtami.
named it
Okay. Got it.
but there's no H. So my name is Austami.
Okay, got it. Great. So, Ostami, iske dekho, there are two things. There are two drivers of this of positive climate action. Na, एक driver है the ethical driver. The three drivers actually, I would say. One is the ethical driver, that it's the right thing to do for posterity, for your future generation, for your ecology, for the environment around you, which has given you a lot. Now, that's the most difficult driver to use, because, as you said, everybody around you is destroying. Why should and you are the one with the least resources? How do you take the higher moral ground? But I still believe it's a good driver, because that change has to start somewhere, and it will start through individuals. Then it will grow up, because governments and companies unfortunately don't see ethic. I mean, that's the capitalist system we have designed. They only see turnover and they only see GDP, which is a larger discussion. We need to change all of that. द सेकेंड ड्राइवर इज द रिस्क ड्राइवर, कि अगर आप ये नहीं करेंगे तो फ्यूचर में रिस्क आपको ही है। अगर पेड़ नहीं रहेंगे तो सॉइल आपकी खराब हो जाएगी, आपकी खेती खराब होगी, अगर आप फर्टिलाइजर डालते रहेंगे आपकी यील्ड ही ड्रॉप होगी। अब उसको क्वांटिफाई करना पॉसिबल है। The third driver, which works the easiest, is the incentive driver. Okay, if you shift to regenerative farming and reduce fertilizer consumption, then for every kilo of fertilizer that you use lesser, this much nitrous emissions you are avoiding, and it can be monetized through savings of PM Pranam or through savings in carbon market. ये सारी calculations हैं, I'll be happy to help you if you want to try it out. और हम यूपी में हम काम कर भी रहे हैं, फर्टिलाइजर रिडक्शन का बड़ा प्रोजेक्ट कर रहे हैं। वी कैन merge your district into that. We have a partnership with the UP government, etc. So ये है आपका incentive driver, that how much money people can make if they do the right thing. In my opinion, it is best to use a combination of all three. People usually start with the incentive and then they go to the higher causes, which is what mostly works. देखिए, पर मैं एक चीज बोलूंगा, and this is it's an interesting conversation for us to have philosophically. हम लोगों ने ना too much of the world has pegged hope of climate action on markets and incentives. The reason why we are all doing this is because we have all started to believe that the society is a subset of the economy. If you really think about it, it's the other way around. The economy is a subset of society. And we need to pivot that thinking collectively, slowly, amongst all of us and in the leadership. Sometimes we should do the right thing for climate because it is the right thing to do, not because we need money for it. ये ना मेरा सबसे फेवरेट एग्जांपल है, हम लोग यूपी में एग्रो फॉरेस्ट्री वगैरह में काम करते हैं, तो हमारे बहराइच में मैं किसान के पास जाके हम थोड़ी बेसलाइंस कर रहे थे, पेड़ गिन रहे थे। ऑब्वियसली वो पेशकार चाचा उनका नाम है, वो हमसे पूछते हैं आप पेड़ क्यों गिन रहे हैं? हमने कहा इसके बदले फिर कार्बन वार्बन होगा। तो बोलते बड़ा अजीब है, हमको तो कभी पेड़ गिनना सिखाया ही नहीं किसी ने, हम तो बस लगाते हैं क्योंकि लगाने चाहिए। इट्स अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट लर्निंग, राइट? सो this is the spectrum of resources that you have: monetary, risk, and ethics, and you can use it in whichever combination. Mostly money comes first, so that, and that is tangible today. 10 years ago it wasn't tangible. Today there are market instruments which make it tangible, but I also believe that collectively raising our ambition of ethical response is something that we all need to work on. So दोनों ही करने चाहिए मेरे हिसाब से।
Okay, another thing that came into my mind is when we talk about climate change, correct me if I'm wrong, we try to talk about the adaptability part most than the mitigation. Like, I just wanted to understand, we do have certain laws, like हम लोगों का single use plastic, there was this thing that came up, other different rules and laws. But do we have, like, what do you think? I just want to understand from your perspective, like, do we also have to work on the mitigation part as well, like work as a monitoring agent, if that is being implemented in the ground properly, so that when it comes, like, as you have also talked about, incentivizing everything, it comes like the community has to be at the brunt of it always, and the industries are making money, everybody is making money, but who has to be at the brunt of it is the community. I'm telling it to you from my perspective. But
Yeah.
I also wanted to understand, when we talk about mitigation, we have certain laws and government coming up with certain policies. How do we also act as a monitoring agent for those rules and laws getting implemented on the ground? So we also have to keep an eye on that. Like, how do you see that? I want to understand that from your perspective.
Yeah, no, very important question. Thank you. So firstly, yes, mitigation should not be the sole responsibility of our communities, number one. But because now, देखिए वो कहते हैं ना, environmental economics में कहते हैं कि every ecosystem has a stack of ecosystem services. अब आपका जो एग्रीकल्चर लैंड है ना, उसका एक इकोसिस्टम सर्विस है क्लाइमेट मिटिगेशन, दूसरा है फूड प्रोडक्शन, तीसरा है क्लाइमेट रेजिलियंस, रेगुलेटिंग एनवायरमेंटल साइकिल उसे कहते हैं। तो अब नाउ द एडवांटेज फॉर यू टू मॉनिटर ईच वन ऑफ दीज इज दैट देयर इज पोटेंशियली अ वे टू मोनेटाइज देम सेपरेटली, है ना? तो अगर आप मिटिगेशन को आप दो एंगल है, एक तो इट्स अ ग्लोबल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी एंड आई फील दैट वी शुड मेक आवर फार्मर्स प्राउड कि आप दुनिया को बचा रहे हैं, बट मोर इंपॉर्टेंटली आप उस मिटिगेशन बेनिफिट को सेल कर सकते हो इन द कार्बन मार्केट्स, सो दैट बिकम्स अ की ड्राइवर टू मॉनिटर दैट. The second point is that whether monitoring that is critical from contributing to the government's goals. तो government खुद करती है, by the way. India every 2 years releases a report to the UN in which they report how much emission reduction has taken place in each sector in India. एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर को बहुत साल तक नहीं करते थे कि हम फार्मर्स पे अपना बर्डन नहीं डालना चाहते, पर उन्होंने शुरू करा है. एज ऑफ नाउ वो सारा डेटा मॉडल होता है, वो एक मॉडल को लेके पूरी कंट्री में अप्लाई कर देते हैं. दे आर एक्चुअली लुकिंग फॉर वेज एंड मीन्स टू कलेक्ट मोर एक्यूरेट डेटा. So you'll be doing a contribution by creating a pilot which can become a basis for scale up, but it should not only be for achieving the government's purposes. You should use that data for monetizing. तो मैं तो बोलूंगा आप करिए, आप पैराडाइम डिजाइन कीजिए जिसमें आप मिटिगेशन रिजिलियंस दोनों को मॉनिटर कर चुके हैं और मिटिगेशन आउटकम को कम्युनिटीज के बिहाफ पे बेचे और उनको इंसेंटिव लाके दे फॉर द ट्रांजिशन, क्योंकि वो बहुत एक रियल इंसेंटिव है और वो रहेगा. अभी वॉलंटरी कार्बन मार्केट है, 2 महीने में इंडिया की नेशनल कार्बन मार्केट आ रही है, ग्रीन क्रेडिट मार्केट आ रही है. सो देर इज अ वे, देर इज अ इंसेंटिव. हाँ, what is important is that you train your communities to get a fair share of that incentive. That is the problem with that market, as is the problem with every market. Capitalism breeds greed. वो नहीं उनको मिल रहा है. That is the key problem here, कि वो बीच के दलाल ले जा रहे हैं. तो आप कैसे उनकी कैपेसिटी बिल्ड कर सकते हैं, वो बड़ा क्रिटिकल है इसमें, ताकि आपका प्रोजेक्ट खत्म हो जाए, आप चले जाएं, तो ये ना हो कि then they get taken for a ride. They should have the agency to argue for their value. वो सबसे जरूरी है.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to ask something.
Yes, Shreya.
Hi, I'm Shreya. I am based in Sultanpur, Uttar Pradesh. So you said a very nice thing that economy is a subset of the society, and I can just recollect in one of my field visits, I met the district agriculture officer of Sultanpur. So he said that recently they had like a drive to motivate farmers to grow climate resilient crops and to millets and all, with the all international millet year happening, everything like that. But it went on for a few months, but he said that due to absence of linkages with the market, the farmers didn't were not able to sustain that. And also, like the way wheat and rice, all these markets are already established. It's very difficult to convince and nudge the farmers towards climate resilient crops. And I think climate change is not only a good enough reasons for them to switch their cropping patterns. In fact, he was telling me that if we look at it this way, that if the economy is a subset of the society, but I think in that case it won't work, because for them it is ultimately how do you how what kind of linkages are already in place. So what my question to you was that how can we create those linkages, and how can like climate resilience also become like a linkage which can be as mainstream as, say, wheat or rice or these existing crops which are there?
नहीं, that's a very pertinent question, very practical question. कि आप मैं वही बोल रहा हूँ कि we want our agricultural system to pave the way for transition, but we are not willing to pay for it. We are not willing to share the burden for it. तो वो share the burden करने के लिए and उनको de-risk करने के लिए ये जरूरी है कि उनका जो सबसे पहली बात तो ये है कि जो रिस्क ऑफ ट्रांजिशन है ना, उसको हम अच्छी तरह असेस कर ले. अब वो रिस्क ऑफ ट्रांजिशन को फाइनेंस करने या सपोर्ट करने की तरह वेरियस वेज एंड मींस. एक है थ्रू द इंटेंजिबल मार्केट, कि भाई उनका जो रिस्क है वो कार्बन फाइनेंस अंडरराइट कर दे, है ना भाई, एनुअली जो भी रिस्क है. एंड वी शुड क्रिएट अ डिमांड फॉर दैट. एज ऑफ नाउ क्या है कि आपकी कार्बन फाइनेंस और इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स की प्राइसिंग डिमांड साइड से सेट होती है, सप्लाई साइड से, बिकॉज हमारे पास मेट्रिसेस नहीं है. दूसरी चीज ये है कि हाउ कैन द पब्लिक सेक्टर स्टेप इन, उसके बारे में देखिए, दिस इज अ I have no answer or no solution to that. This is a oft debated issue that we are asking. There are various models for this. For example, in some parts of the country, they have now started procuring millets and climate resilient crops for the midday meals, and that has kick-started production. In some states, they have introduced millets into the public distribution system. In some states, they are thinking of the MSP for the millets. The final thing is that there are lots of startups, entrepreneurs like Tata का soulful food है, ये है वो है, who are actually looking to integrate into value chains, but the transaction cost of new value chains is so difficult कि वो कर नहीं पा रहे हैं. So can people like us help reduce the transaction cost of building more value chains by using our social capital is another way out. तो वो हमको वो risk तो obviously offset करना है. और and when I say economy is a subset of the market, I mean it, or vice versa, I mean it more for the industries and urban dwellers. हमारी rural communities, so they live with the principle of economy is a subset of society. The other side is not playing ball, because of which all of this is happening. ना वो अब हमारी large industries को चाहिए climate mitigation at the least cost. क्यों लीस्ट कॉस्ट हो? इट शुड बी एट द अप्रोप्रिएट कॉस्ट. बट द प्रॉब्लम इज दैट द सप्लाई साइड इज नॉट एग्रीगेटेड. हमारे पास मॉडल्स नहीं है, बेसिस नहीं है. अब अगर हम जाके बोले माइक्रोसॉफ्ट को कि हमको हमारे फार्मर्स को कार्बन के लिए $60 चाहिए, दिस इज द कैलकुलेशन, देर इज अ चांस दैट दे माइट से यस, पर वो है ही नहीं हमारे पास अभी ना. अभी तो हम जाके बोलते हैं आपको जितना अच्छा लगता है दे दीजिए. So this is one of the issues कि उसको हम bridge करें तो. So I would say the solution is more information on the risk value, and the second is how we can bridge the gap on the value chain, which is a long drawn painful process. It requires investments and it requires social capital. And then the third is policy support, which we need to advocate for.
Right. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, guys.
Hello,
I
sir.
don't have instant solutions for many of your problems, but I mean, these are problems all of us are grappling with. But if we work collaboratively and create a large enough force, so then we'll be able to solve all of these. Hopefully. Yes, Ina.
Yeah, hello, sir. Good evening. This is Anna from Palamu, Jharkhand. So, Palamu district often faces challenges related to water scarcity and मतलब irregular rainfall. So, जो kind of impact बहुत directly करता है agriculture और daily life में. So, in such a situation, how can we involve the local communities in development solution for better water management? Like, is there any successful projects or cases studies from other regions, sir? जिनका similar challenges है, and can you share how those initiatives were implemented and what result they achieved or something?
There are some good case studies from Maharashtra, from Meghalaya, etc., in which community-based watershed development and watershed conservation has resulted in significant increase in water availability and in improvement in crop output. So there are some case studies around that which we can share and we can discuss. The other thing is that there is a very interesting new development in Uttar Pradesh on micro irrigation, which is a very good case study now. अभी भी हुआ है. In partnership with the World Bank, they've developed a digital portal for farmer selection and subsidy release, and automated the subsidy release for micro irrigation. तो उससे क्या हुआ है कि उसमें होता क्या है कि all the vendors of micro irrigation are registered on the portal. जैसे ही एक फार्मर रजिस्टर हो और उसका डेटा वैलिडेट हो जाए, उसी टाइम सब्सिडी रिलीज हो जाती है वेंडर को और माइक्रो इरिगेशन इस्टेब्लिश हो जाती है और उसको फिर रिमोटली मॉनिटर कर लेते हैं. सो उससे क्या हुआ है, आई थिंक दैट दे हैव रिड्यूस्ड the time from farmer registration to micro irrigation system installation with subsidy, I think down to like 40 days as compared to 6 months in other states. ऐसे कुछ. So some innovations like that are possible, which people like us can drive. Like Jharkhand can replicate the model. You can do pilots in your district to showcase. But beyond that, ये community-based watershed. अच्छा, community-based watershed management में a large part of the work is soil conservation, SMC works, and tree plantation. All three of these, by the way, attract a lot of carbon finance. So you can actually get financing for the community to do the community-based watershed management, which results in more water and more agriculture. The cyclical flow है जिसके लिए financing model available है. We can work on it. I'll be very happy to share some more details with you in which you can work on. और वो थोड़ा scale पे किया जाए तो that can be quite attractive also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
If we don't have any more questions, I think we are at the end of our session. So, okay, we don't, right?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Thank you, Swapan. Thanks a lot. It is honestly a lens with which we have to think about the work that we do. And that's the intent, and I'm sure our learners are going to work towards it. I'll be happy to connect you with their ongoing interventions, with their potential interventions, and I'll share your email ID also, if that's all right, so that they can reach out. But yeah, is Anish here? Yeah, I think. But yeah, he did convey his regards and his immense gratitude as well on text. I think he's traveling, so he couldn't do it himself. But thanks a lot, Swapan, for this enriching conversation that we had.
Thank you, Shruti. Thank you, Pritha, and thanks to Anish sir. And yes, please do connect me with anybody you'd like to. And Shruti, maybe one thing could be to actually go through the list of projects that people are working on and to see what climate dimension can be added there. I'll be happy to I'm traveling for a couple of weeks, but after that, happy to have a longish session to do that and see how we can help everybody add this dimension and help see them through, scale it up, etc. So very happy to support that.
Absolutely. I'll work on that and we'll be in touch about that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing for India, and good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Swapan.
sir. Thank you.